If you've watched my show before or visited my website, Constantly Cooking, you'll already know about my deep and abiding love for vegetables. On today's show, I'm going to show you 3 ways to take familiar vegetables and present them in a delicious new format. This recipe came about when a friend said to me there was no way I could make a vegan Caesar salad that tasted as good as one made with dairy and eggs. It was a huge success and I make it all the time now. So we're going to start with our crispy topping. Instead of croutons, I love to do garlicky breadcrumbs. So we're going to saute panko, and you can use gluten-free breadcrumbs if you prefer, in garlic-infused olive oil. So I'm going to turn on my burner. It's a little bit noisy, but it'll just be for a couple of minutes while we toast the breadcrumbs. So I'll put the oil in the skillet, just enough to generously coat the bottom, and then we'll sprinkle in our panko. Panko is sometimes called Japanese breadcrumbs, and what's interesting about them is they're really sharp little shards and they stay really crispy. And what I prefer about using panko instead of croutons is that you get some crisp with every bite, not just when you spear one of the bread cubes or croutons. So we're going to just let that sit in the pan for a few minutes. Keep an eye on it when you're making this because they do get brown very, very quickly. And while that's doing its thing, we'll make the Caesar dressing. Now normally you'd have anchovy paste and sometimes even an egg yolk or a coddled egg yolk to make your Caesar dressing, but you don't need those things. Dijon is going to be what holds my dressing together instead of the egg yolk. And I don't even miss not having the anchovy in there. So we're going to start by putting some rice vinegar in. It's one of my favorites for dressing. White wine vinegar would be really nice for this as well. Then we're going to add some lemon juice. It's really a very straightforward vinaigrette because the croutons have the breadcrumbs have so much flavor that you don't need to add a whole lot more to the dressing. And I've got the strainer here just to catch the seeds. Looking for about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice to get added to my Dijon and rice vinegar. This is a really juicy lemon. Love it when that happens. So we're only going to need a half. And I always like to put in the salt and pepper at this point. As I've mentioned before, the salt won't dissolve as well once the oil is added, so it's a good idea to add it first and give it a little bit of a shake. And pepper. I always prefer freshly cracked pepper, way more flavor. Before I give this a shake, I'm just going to stir my breadcrumbs here. They look like they're not doing anything, and then all of a sudden they're going to start to brown. All right, so we'll give this a shake. And that makes sure that the Dijon gets well distributed as well as helping the salt dissolve. And now we'll add our olive oil. If you're really a big fan of garlic-infused olive oil, you can absolutely use that in the dressing, but I'm just using regular olive oil today. And I'm not going to add quite all of it. I think that's probably about enough. There we go. And our breadcrumbs are just getting perfectly golden brown. As I said, you do watch them because they can turn on a dime. Give our vinaigrette one more shake. And it's ready, so we can set it aside. I'm going to focus on the breadcrumbs just for a minute here. And they can go back in the bowl that they were in before. You want to get them out of the pan as soon as they're toasted, otherwise, of course, they're going to keep on going because the pan is retaining its heat. All right, I'm happy with that. And into the bowl. The nice thing about using garlic-infused oil is you don't have bits of garlic that can scorch in the heat and become bitter tasting. So this way you have a lot more control over the flavor. All right. I'm just going to put these aside over here. We'll use them later. So now on to our kale. I love kale because it's so sturdy and it stays nice and crunchy even with the Caesar dressing. I've washed and spun this dry. You can also just wash and shake the leaves if you prefer. And an important thing to remember is how to get the green parts off the stems. The stems really aren't edible. If you stir fry them, maybe, but they're really quite coarse. So basically, I like to describe it as unzipping the leaf. Just run your fingers down the stem and look at that. You've got all the good parts and no stem. And I'll just do that with one more leaf, working just a bit at a time. Some unzip easier than others. This one's there, a little stubborn. And now I'm going to cut this up 2 bite-sized pieces. Because they're irregular, they're not long and uniform like romaine leaves, I usually do a cut in one direction and then a cross cut in the other direction. So now we're going to dress our salad. I'm going to give this another shake. And there's something important to know about dressing kale. You can't just pour the dressing on top and expect good results. You actually have to massage the dressing into the salad. And I know that sounds a little weird, but what that does is it really allows the dressing to soften the leaves and make them more tender and a lot less chewy. So really the only way to do this is to get in there with your hands. So I'm going to dive right in. And you'll notice that the leaves start to change color. They become a darker green and almost glossy looking as the fibers in the kale soften. And no matter what dressing it is, if it's a Caesar dressing, some other kind of vinaigrette, this will guarantee great results every time. So I'm sure you can see now it is definitely darker, nicely coated, no puddle of dressing in the bottom, which means I've added just the right amount. And now I'm going to go wash my hands and we'll finish our preparation. All right, hands are clean. Now we can assemble our salad to make it ready to serve. So I've got my serving bowl here. Just clear the decks a little bit. And I'm going to transfer the kale into the bowl. Try not to spill too much of it overboard. There we go, just the perfect amount for this bowl. And now we're going to add our toppings. So of course you already know about our toasted panko with the garlic infused oil. That's going to be great. Now what about the Parmesan and the bacon bits? Well, we haven't forgotten that either. What I've got here is some vegan Parmesan, which I made with nutritional yeast, which comes in little flakes. You can get that at pretty much any health food store, and also some cashews, some garlic salt, and it tastes fantastic. So we'll sprinkle that on just like we would for regular parm. And I like a lot of cheese on my salad, so we'll be generous. And then for our bacon bits, what I've actually made are coconut bacon bits, and you can find the recipe on my website. It's shards of coconut with a whole lot of delicious seasonings baked in the oven for about 15 minutes. They're crispy. You can hear the noise as I move them around, and they're just fantastic. And then, last but not least, our breadcrumbs. And now our fabulously delicious vegan kale Caesar salad is ready to be put on the table.
Up next is a tasty and nutritious vegan dish that can be a meal on its own or a tasty side for your favorite protein. It's super fast, easy to make, colorful, nutritious, and most importantly, really delicious.
The easiest way to remove seeds from vegetables like squash is with an ice cream scoop. Its sharp edge and rigid design makes it the perfect tool. I love roasting vegetables instead of boiling them. It brings out all their natural sweetness and great flavor. For this dish, we're going to use cauliflower and sweet potato, and it's just so fantastic when it comes together. So I'm going to start by peeling my sweet potato. And here's an interesting thing. There are actually multiple layers to the skin of a sweet potato. So you've got to go down deep enough to get to the darker orange. You can see how we've got lighter and then darker. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of discoloration. It's going to be quite brown when it cooks. And I didn't learn that for the longest time. So there's a little bonus tip for you. Another good tip, the rounded point of a peeler is meant for this job. Digging out, whoops, little bits, just like that. All right. Now we're going to cut our sweet potato into pieces about 3/4 of an inch in size. Just going to even this one up. The smaller you make them, obviously, the faster they're going to cook. And we're going to put them in this bowl, to which we'll also add the cauliflower. Okay, so before we tackle our cauliflower, I'm going to also slice a medium-sized onion. Roasted onion just tastes so good in almost everything. And about the same size, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch pieces. Into the bowl with those. And now our cauliflower. I just bought a small head. When you're purchasing it, check it over, even if it's wrapped in plastic, and make sure there aren't too many brown spots on it. You can cut those out, but it's preferable to find one that isn't brown. And the easiest way to dismantle a cauliflower is to cut the core out from the bottom first, and then all the big florets will sort of fall right off. And we're going to cut these into similar size pieces. Again, we're going for an even roasting time, so about 3/4 of an inch. If they're too small, they'll kind of start to fall apart when they're cooking, so you have to keep that in mind. So now we have our vegetables all ready. I'm just going to give them a little toss with my hands, and that helps me break up some of the pieces of onion. They don't have to be individual layers, but you don't want them to go into the oven in big pieces like that, otherwise they just won't get as tender. Okay, that looks great. And now we're going to drizzle. We're going to sprinkle some spices and drizzle some oil. So I've got a combination here of garlic powder and chili powder, as well as smoked paprika and salt and pepper. So if you put that on first and follow it by the oil, then the oil is going to help it stick to the vegetables. I'm just kind of shaking these dishes so that the spices get combined. There we go. And now for this big bowl full, we have about 2 tablespoons of oil. As I've mentioned before, a lot of people think vegetables are going to get crispier if you add more oil, kind of akin to deep frying. But in fact, they're going to be soggy if you put too much oil on, and they won't crisp up as much. There we go. So I'm going to transfer this to my baking tray, which I've lined with parchment paper. And then I'm going to put it in the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. And I'll stir it once or twice during the cooking time until the cauliflower and sweet potatoes feel tender when I pierce them with the tip of a knife. All right, these are hot out of the oven. They look so good and they smell even better. I love the little crispy bits that you get on the edges that let you know they're perfectly roasted. So we're going to transfer them back into the same bowl that we put the seasonings on before. And the easiest way to do that is just to pick it up by the parchment paper and slide it right in. And I'll grab the 2 stragglers here and we'll get this pan out of the way. All right, we're just going to let these sit for a few minutes while we prepare the rest of our ingredients. So, of course, we want some great toppings. I've got some roasted sunflower seeds here. I've done this with pumpkin seeds, with chopped walnuts, anything crunchy just to offset the tender vegetables is great. And I always like a pop of color, so as you may know, my go-tos are always chives or green onion. You could use parsley if you like, probably not basil because when it hits the hot vegetables it's going to wilt and start to turn brown. Cilantro would be another great option. That would go very nicely with these flavors too. All right, so we'll just put those in our bowl to get ready for later. And although the vegetables are seasoned, they're going to be even better with a little bit of dressing on top. So just a simple vinaigrette with rice vinegar. Apple cider vinegar would be great as well. Some more of the smoked paprika to echo the notes that are already there from the roasting, and salt and pepper. And then, of course, my favorite, maple syrup. I haven't tried making vinaigrettes with brown sugar, but I bet that would be really, really delicious as well. I'm going to just shake that up to help the salt dissolve. And now we're going to add some olive oil. And that's probably about the right amount. As you can see, I often kind of eyeball my dressings, but I do label them and save them, so I'll make something else later this week if I don't use all the dressing for this dish. All right, so now we're gonna drizzle it on. And again, you just want enough to coat the vegetables without swamping them. Go. And I'm just going to give them a little stir. You can see how much they've shrunken down. The bowl was quite full before the trip through the oven. And now I'm going to put them in a serving dish. Always at least one runaway there. Make sure I get all the onions. And we will add our toppings. First the sunflower seeds, then our chives, now we have a healthy and delicious roasted vegetable dish just ready to be consumed.
I really didn't appreciate how versatile squash are until I started purchasing them regularly at local farmers markets. There's so many different varieties, each with distinctive flavors. And up next, I'm going to show you how easy it is to quickly pan fry sliced butternut squash for a super tasty side dish.
Butternut squash is so versatile. I do cook it a lot, but I'd never tried pan frying it until recently. I usually oven roast it. I'm really happy with this method. So we've already cut the bulb end off the squash. It's just a little tiny bit soft here where the seeds were, but we're just going to work with this part for now. The bulb end can easily be chopped up and roasted, added to soups, whatever. I never let that go to waste. And we're looking for uniform rounds. I'm going to cut them about maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. And you should always have quite a firm vegetable. If it's soft, that means it's probably starting to spoil. And contrary to what you might think, it is a good idea to keep butternut squash in the fridge if you're storing it for a week or more, preferably in a low humidity drawer if that's a possibility for you. Now I don't know that I'll be able to fit all of this in my pan, so I'm just going to cut, I think, this many slices, and we'll save the rest for something else. So to pan fry this, we're going to start, of course, by heating the pan. And I'm going to add some olive oil. Just about 1.5 tablespoons. And then we're going to add the butter second. And there's an important reason for that. If you put butter straight in the pan on its own, it doesn't do well under high heat. It's going to brown or burn. But if you put the butter in some olive oil, the olive oil seems to insulate the butter and it prevents that burning situation. So that was kind of a neat tip that a chef taught me. So we're just going to let the butter melt, keeping it within the confines of the olive oil puddle. While that's happening, I'm going to sprinkle the top sides of our squash with some salt and pepper. And then these will be placed face down in the pan. And that way the seasoning will start to happen right from the beginning of the cooking time. Just make sure this is evenly spread around our pan. Give it a little more heat. And this is a dish that can be prepared ahead of time. They're at their absolute peak when they come straight out of the pan and onto the table, but you can make them ahead of time and reheat them in the oven. All right, we've got some good sizzling action going there. So I'm just going to swirl the pan. And now I'm going to start to add my squash slices. So just place them carefully, remembering you've got some hot fat in the pan. One of the reasons I love butternut squash is the color. If you have a plate that's kind of pale with, say, for example, chicken, and maybe you're going to have some potatoes with it, all of a sudden you've got this great big pop of color, and I think that's just great. Now we're going to put some more salt and pepper on the other sides. And we're going to turn up our heat a little bit. Because these slices are relatively thin, it shouldn't take too long for them to cook, probably about 4 or 5 minutes. And when they're near to the end of their cooking time, I'm going to brush them with some maple syrup, so that will just give them a darker glaze. And I'm going to sprinkle them with cinnamon. Cardamom is also great. As you may know, I'm a big fan of cardamom. I've also used grated fresh nutmeg on top, and that's been spectacular. If you wanted to go away from the sweet profile, you could simply sprinkle it with a little bit of fresh thyme and some Parmesan cheese, and that would be a really great option to this sort of sweeter profile. So the sizzling is exactly what you want. And I just kind of spin them around the pan as opposed to picking them up. You want them to stay in the heat. My old house isn't perfectly level, so the fat tends to gather on one side. So this way they all get a trip through the butter and olive oil. Now you may notice that I didn't peel my squash and the rind is still there. A lot of people are surprised to see that when I present them with this finished dish. But in fact, the skin gets so tender from this cooking method that it's completely edible, or if you're squeamish, you can just cut it off as you eat it. But the reason for leaving it on is that the rings stay intact as you're manipulating them. But I'll often eat squash skin. It's very delicious. And for most vegetables, that's where a lot of the nutrition is in the skin. So it's a great idea to eat it if that's appealing to you. Okay, let's check again. All right, you can see we've got some nice golden brown action happening. So over they go. Oh, I'm really happy with how these are cooking. It is important to make your slices as uniformly thick as possible or thin as possible. I really tried to go for the uniform 1/4 of an inch. When I was teaching a younger person how to do this, we actually took a knife and just scored the squash in 1/4 inch increments so that she could follow along and cut them evenly. She wanted to use a Sharpie, but I didn't think that was a good idea. So we're just going to let that sit for another probably 2 minutes, and then we'll check to see if the other side is nice and brown. All right, I'm going to take a look at the bottom sides now. Oh, look at that. Absolutely perfect. Obviously, you don't want to burn them, but you do want them to be deeply golden brown. So I'm going to flip them. And then I'm going to add my maple syrup and my little bit of cinnamon. Tried drizzling, and I find that over the hot pan I just can't be quite as steady as I like. So brushing it on seems to be the most effective technique. And I just do the top sides. I don't want these to be too sweet. You could flip them again and sort of caramelize the maple syrup onto the squash, but I don't feel like that step is necessary. And the syrup will slide off a little bit on the serving tray, and to me that makes them look almost like perfect squash pancakes. So I don't mind that look at all. Okay, I'm going to turn the burner off. And now we're going to add our sprinkles. Actually, I'll do the cinnamon once I put them on the serving plate, and that way I can control it a little better. You can obviously plate it right onto people's individual plates if you prefer, but I find this is a dish that looks so pretty to bring to the table on a platter, and then folks can help themselves. set this down so I can add the cinnamon. And just a little hint. All right. I think I'm going to make this the centerpiece of the table for tonight's meal because it looks so good. It can be a lot of fun and deliciously rewarding to switch up your usual side dish suspects. I highly recommend that you try these pan-fried butternut squash rounds, this vegan kale Caesar salad, and especially this roasted cauliflower and sweet potato. They're all so good.